Are you ready? Stand by.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel Shooter Make Ready, the channel that's been dedicated to precision shooting. Today's topic is going to be about one of my favorite air guns, the Fx Impact. I think the best place to start this topic off with is what to do when you get your Fx Impact the very first time. Now the next couple of things I'm going to speak about is something that I apply to all of my guns, not just the Fx Impact. So the very first thing that I do is to check if there's any air in this gun. If there's no air, I will obviously fill it. After that, I will take the gun, move to a safe place, and do a couple of dry fire shots just to see if the gun functions properly. After a couple of dry fire shots and I see that the gun is functioning properly, I will then just check all the screws on the outside that I can see to make sure that everything is secured properly. So after the pre-checks, the next thing I do is to do a leak test on the gun. Now the way that I do this is I will fill the gun up with air, I will label the gauge, and then put the gun in the case and let it stand for about 12 hours. Before you label the gauge to put the gun away, give the gun about an hour of rest before you put the label on. The reason for this is after you fill the gun with air, that air takes usually about an hour to settle down in temperature and in pressure. If you're going to fill it up and put the label straight away onto that gauge for the leak check, you will get false readings. So make sure you leave it for about an hour before you put the label on. So after the 12 hours has passed, I will go back to the gun and check my label. Now, if you've put the gun away overnight, there could be a possibility of a temperature drop or increase through that night period. So if you check your label and you see the needle moved slightly, that is still acceptable. If there is a definite leak, that needle will move quite a lot. And if you are doubting it, let it stand for another 12 hours and recheck it again. On top of the Fx Impact is your scope rail, and this is where you're going to mount your scope. But I think there's very little people out there that know that you can do an alignment of that rail as well. Now the procedure to do this is fairly simple, and all that you need to do is loosen the 3 screws of the scope rail on top and then move it to align it with the main rail of the Fx Impact on top. Now you can do this by checking the 2 lines and making sure that those 2 lines is in parallel with each other to get the perfect alignment with the scope rail with the rest of the gun. By checking this alignment, you will also then solve problems like running out of windage on your scope as well. The way that I measure my scope height is usually from the middle of my scope where the turret is to the middle of my barrel. That distance over there I will insert into my ballistic programs like Strelok or into my ballistic Kestrel. I always use adjustable mounts with my scopes on the Fx Impact because I know I'm going to do some long range shooting in the future to come. By adding the adjustable mounts to the scope, you will have the capability to use the full elevation on your scope when you do your dialing. Now before I speak about the barrel setups on this Fx Impact, it's always a good thing to remove your barrel from this gun before you work on it. The very first thing that you want to do is to unscrew the shroud and take it off your barrel. Undo the set screw here in the back of the valve block, and if you have a later model, to undo the 2 barrel clamp screws here in the front and then pull your barrel from your gun. The next thing that you want to do is to unscrew your lug nut here in the front to reveal the liner inside. By gently taking a piece of leather or cardboard, you can clamp down on the liner here in the front and then wiggle it forwards and backwards while you pull the liner and remove it from the barrel housing. You want to check inside to make sure there's no O-rings left behind. If you do see O-ring inside, don't shoot it out. Just take the housing, tap it gently like this, and that O-ring will fall out by itself. Now if you want to know what the twist rate is of your liner, you can measure it yourself. Now I'm going to show you my method here now, so you guys better listen up. The very first thing that you need to do is to take a marker pen and mark one of the grooves on the outside of this barrel, either at the beginning or the end. And what you need to do then is to place it in front of you on a flat surface like this table. Also making sure that the mark that you've made is pointing directly upwards to the 12 o'clock position. Following the marked groove and rotate the barrel at the same time. You need to rotate and follow the groove until the mark that you've made has made one full revolution. Once the mark returns to its original point and the barrel has made one full revolution, that is where you have to stop following that groove. Now where you stopped, that is where you need to make your second mark. From here you need to take your measuring tape and measure the distance between the two marks in inches. Say for instance you measured 16 inches, that means that the twist rate of your liner will be a 1 in 16. Say for instance you've measured 19 inches, then the twist rate on that liner will be a 1 in 19. That's the method that you can use to measure your twist rate on your liner. But FX has made this much easier these days because they engraved all of that information for you on top of the latest liners. Now I will advise you guys to clean out your liner like this, especially if it's a brand new one that you got from the factory. After you clean your liner, you can install it now back into your barrel housing. Make sure that you've got your O-rings in place. I have found that when you put these liners back into your housing like this, that these O-rings sometimes tend to move up and down like this, and that annoys me quite a bit. Two things that I do: sometimes I take a little bit of grease and I just give the O-rings a nice little wipe down with the grease, and it slides much better into the housing. And other times I take a little bit of plumber's tape or thread tape and I just do 1 or 2 wraps around the O-rings, and that also keeps it nicely in place when you put it into the housing. Or you can do what I do and remove the O-rings completely and put a carbon fiber sleeve over it and put it back into the barrel housing. Also make sure that you install your liner the right way around. The breech end with the little ring go into your barrel housing first. Once the liner is in place, you can take your lock nut and start screwing that in until it stops. And after it stops, you can take a 10 spanner and just tighten it down lightly. Don't over torque it, don't put a lot of stress on this nut in the front, because it is not good for your liner inside. The last thing that I will do is to check the front side of the barrel here and make sure it doesn't touch anywhere, and make sure that it's still free floating. I'm a very big believer in a free floating barrel. Over all these years, I've been getting the best consistent accuracy out of this gun with a free floating system. I'm also sure that most of you guys have seen some of my latest gun builds, and you have spotted some carbon fiber sleeves around my barrels. But in all honesty, that's only carbon fiber sleeves that I've inserted over the barrels to protect it against any scratch and dings in the field. And aesthetically, it actually makes the gun look very nice as well. Now, if you look very closely at the back of the barrel system, you can also see that there's a small gap between the carbon fiber sleeve and the main block of the gun, because I want to make sure that that barrel stay free floating. And talking about nice stuff, I'm pretty sure a lot of you have seen some of these shiny barrels on some of my guns as well, and maybe have wondered what barrels this is. It is normal FX barrels. If you look closely, there's a jam nut in the front and there's a brass port in the back. If you unscrew the jam nut here, you will also see it's a standard FX barrel. There you can see is the liner. I pull the liner out. You can see over there, there's nothing fancy about that. The only reason why this barrel is so nice and shiny is I took the time to polish the gun blue off it. And how I achieved that is I took some steel wool, some car polish, and a lot of elbow grease, and that's how I got to this barrel that looks so nice and shiny. I just love the look to it. Before I discuss the next segment, there's a statement that I need to put out there, and you guys please need to listen to the following. The following information is based upon my own way of setting up my own guns. I'm a qualified professional and a qualified airsmith by trade. I will not be held responsible for any damages or losses of your own doing. Now the M3 Impact has a dual regulator system, and that means it has a bottle reg here in the front and it has a second final regulator here in the back. So what I do is I take out my front regulator and I add an extra washer to the stack. I also reconfigure my stack in 3 sets of 4 washers each. By doing this, I increase the strength in this regulator and now it can handle higher reg pressures much better. So once I've set my front bottle regulator pressure to more or less 200 bar, I will leave it at that. I will never ever touch that again. Now your second final regulator is the most important one, and this one you want to set depending on what projectile you want to shoot. For pellets, I choose a regulator pressure anything between 110 bar to 130 bar, and I have found within that range you can shoot anything from a 177 pellet all the way up to a 30 cal pellet. For slugs, you can set your rear regulator pressure anything between 150 to 170 bar, and again with that pressure you can shoot any slugs from 177 all the way up to 30 cal slugs as well. The valve adjuster here in the front, I will set anything between 2.5 to 3 lines for pellet shooting, and for slugs I will open it up fully. After I've done my settings on my regulators and my valve adjustment, I will move towards my hammer setting. Now this is where I basically go sit down and start at the lower setting and click my way up until I find my desired velocity. Now usually my desired velocity for pellets is anything between 880 feet per second to 920 feet per second, and for slug shooting I like to keep it within 900 to 1000 feet per second. The slug power kit has been designed and developed to boost the power on the Fx Impact, and this is especially very important if you want to shoot some heavier pellets or if you want to do some slug shooting. In the slug power kit, the 3 most important parts will be your pin probe, your hammer spacers and your softer valve return spring. So the main function for your pin probe is obviously to push the pellet or your slug from the magazine into the barrel. But the design of the pin probe allowed the maximum of airflow also to pass from the transfer port into the barrel as well. So something to note here, if you install your pin probe on your gun without a dual transfer port or enlarged transfer port under it, then that pin probe will mean nothing. That pin probe needs an enlarged transfer port underneath it to work to its best effect. You're going to waste your time by putting the pin probe in there with a small little transfer port underneath it. So keep that in mind. Now the spacers that you get with your slug power kit gets installed over your spring guide. Now the spacer serves 2 purposes. Number 1, it stiffens up your hammer spring tension, and number 2, it adds weight to the hammer configuration. Now with the extra spring tension and the heavier hammer, you can now hit the valve harder, which means it will stay open for much longer, which will allow more air through, which means you will have more power. Yeah, I know that's a lot to take in, but that's the way it is. Now there is something to note between 1 spacer and 2 spacers on your spring guide. If you add only 1 spacer to your spring guide, you will have the ability to use your macro adjustment to the maximum with your micro adjustment to the maximum, both at the same time. There will be no issues at all. But I think you won't be able to push the gun to the full potential of power yet with only 1 spacer. Now if you add the second spacer to the system, you will have the ability to push the gun to the maximum level of power. But it does come with a little bit of a trade-off. Now the trade-off is you won't have the ability to turn the macro adjuster with the micro adjuster both to maximum settings. You will see if you turn your macro adjuster to 16 and you start turning your micro adjuster past 4.5, you will realize that the trigger don't engage anymore. Now that's not a flaw to the gun or a problem with this gun. It is basically just the trade-off that you will have by adding that second spacer, because it shortens the stroke length of the hammer sled basically engaging with the shear. So that is 2 things that you can basically weigh up. Or you can go a completely different route and add a tungsten hammer to your gun as well. That is up to you guys. Now the valve spring that you get with your slug power kit, you can install and replace the standard one that's in there. The softer valve spring will just allow that valve to travel a little bit further and let the valve stay open for a little bit longer. And again, the longer the valve can stay open, the more air can flow through, which generate more power again. I also want to touch base on the side shot magazines that you get with your FX Impact. I think most of you have seen that I use some 3D printed lids on my mags. The reason for this is I use slugs that is much longer than your average slugs, and it can't fit into these magazines without a customized lid. Now if you look into this magazine, you will see that there is a big cog here, and this cog is what holds all your pellets and your slugs in place. This cog is underneath spring tension, and that tension is what makes this magazine cycle. Now what I do is I give the spring inside here a little bit of a boost by giving it an extra rotation and locking it down. Now that way the spring tension is a little bit harder, and the harder spring tension pushes the cycle a little bit faster, and that means it will work a lot better when you use heavier slugs in this mag. Now the very first thing that I do if I go to the shooting range or to the hunting fields with this gun is to take a couple of perch shots before I take aim on any targets out there. Now a perch shot, for those who do not know what it is basically a dry fire shot or shots that you do with the gun before you start shooting at your targets. Now the reason for that perch shots is basically to wake up the air system inside a gun like this. And the reason for this is overnight when the gun is standing, or if the gun has been standing for a few hours, the air basically settles down in the system, and that means that your temperature will also change in your air that you've got in this gun. And when that temperature changes, your pressure of your air inside the gun will change as well. And it will change in your cylinder, and it will change in your plenum over here. So this is why it's important to take a couple of perch shots if the gun has been standing for a long time, just to get the air moving through the system and get it back up to the standard pressure again. So when you pick up the FX Impact, always remember not to pick it up by the barrel end like this. Anything you do on this side and this barrel will cause your harmonics to change, and you will have accuracy issues. So never ever pull on this barrel, pull it up, or carry it by that barrel. If you want to pick up this gun, I will advise taking your hand, putting it underneath the plenum like this and underneath the cylinder, and you can pick it up like that, or you can pick it up by the scope like this, or you can do the conventional way and pick it up by the grip at the bottom. Something that has happened now a few times with me before is that when I take out my gun out of my gun bag, or when I carry it outside in the field, or when I have it close to me, and moving with the gun, then I by accident sometimes move or turn this micro adjuster here or the valve adjuster in the front. And this can happen very, very quickly, especially if you put this gun in a very tight gun bag. Now the way that I've solved this issue was basically to take my phone and take a picture from the side of the gun here that will show me the macro, micro and valve adjuster in the one photo. So every time I go out now to the field or the shooting range, I quickly have a look at the photo and make sure that all the settings is still at the same place. Believe me, this has saved me a lot of points and saved me a lot of misses as well. I'm pretty sure a lot of you could have come to a point where you got very busy or you were shooting a lot of shots and you can't remember if the gun was loaded or not loaded. Now there is a very quick method that I'm going to show you now to check if the gun is cocked or not cocked. So the very first thing that I do is I take my finger and I gently pull on the cocking handle here on the side. By pulling on it, you will see that the cocking handle by itself will pop open. That is perfectly normal because there is a bit of spring tension on the cocking block, and that is why this cocking handle has popped open like this. From here, you want to gently start pulling on the cocking handle to feel if there is spring tension on it or not. When you feel that there is spring tension on this handle, then the gun is not cocked. But if you pull on this handle and there's no tension and it pops fully open like that, then you know that the gun was cocked. Now this is very important. In this position, when the bolt is fully back, before you push the bolt close, you want to remove your magazine here from the back. Because if you don't remove the magazine from the back and you push the bolt closed now, you run the risk of double loading your gun. And believe me, you do not want to double load this gun. It can cause serious headaches. So remember, when the bolt is fully open, first remove the mag and then close the bolt. I will also strongly advise after you close the bolt that you point the gun in a safe direction and you rather discharge the gun to make sure that the round is cleared. If you guys feel unsure, the best method that I can tell you here is to pull the bolt all the way back, remove that magazine, close the bolt, aim in a safe direction and discharge the shot. That way you know you are safe. Another way of getting this gun to shoot consistently accurate is to make sure that you never let your front air cylinder drop under your regulator pressure here at the back. Now a rule of thumb for me is to keep my front cylinder pressure always 20 bar more than my regulator pressure in the back. So say for instance, my reg pressure is set for 150 bar, then I will do my refill on my air tank in the front once I've hit 170 bar on the front gauge for the cylinder. This has been a rule of thumb for me and it's always been working very good for myself on guns like this. Now today I just basically touched on some general points of the FX Impact, and I'm very sure that I'm still going to make a lot of videos of this gun in the future to come. There's a lot to discuss still about this gun. I think it's one of the most interesting guns out there, and I think it is my all-time favorite of all the guns so far. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please remember to subscribe now. And if you like today's content, please smash that like button for me. It will really help me out a lot. And for those guys who want to see a little bit more action and want to see some hunting, you guys can go check out my other channel, Air Hunter Gerard, which is only dedicated for hunting. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Cheers.